So, Albert Bandura is a psychologist who proposed that we learn by doing and observing. So he was very influential in the 1980s and still is influential today. But he was one of the very first theorists who explored observational learning, and he is now at Stanford University. So according to Bandura, much of our behavior is due to observing and imitating others. So, for example, how do you know that when you walk into an elevator with other people, you're supposed to face forward? Nobody tells you to do that. There's no written rule, but you learn through observation. So, other people are doing it, and so you're going to follow. This is also how we learn cultural rules and social norms. So, we observe other people in our culture, and then we imitate it. A Korean woman told this story. She said, "In many Asian cultures, you immediately remove your shoes when entering someone's home. And here's the thing, I don't know why. Growing up, it's just what we did. My mother never pulled me aside and told me anything about respect or any ancient tale about ghosts living in your shoes, etc. I really don't know why Koreans do this, but I just do it. So without learning the rationale, I learned to remove my shoes just by watching others do it as I grew up." And I'm sure that you can imagine or that you can think of instances in your own life when you act in a certain way because you've observed other people doing it. So Albert Bandura was interested in whether he could demonstrate that learning occurred by watching others. To test this hypothesis, he conducted studies that we call the Bobo doll studies. And so during this study, he put children in a room with a Bobo doll and an adult researcher of the same sex as the child. And so a Bobo doll is one of these plastic dolls with a lower center of mass. And so there's like a weight in the bottom. So you can push it down and it'll bounce back up. And so the child was with an adult in the room, and the adult was playing with the Bobo doll as the child watched. So the researcher in the room either played gently with the Bobo doll or played very aggressively with the Bobo doll, kicking and punching the Bobo doll, even getting a mallet and hitting the Bobo doll with the mallet. Oops. So, so this was the design of the study. So the adults either played politely or aggressively with the Bobo doll, and the children watched. And the researchers found that when the researcher played quietly with the Bobo doll, the child also played quietly with the Bobo doll. But when the researcher played aggressively with the Bobo doll, the child also played aggressively. So this was the first evidence of straight imitation. The children very simply imitated the behaviors of the adults that they were watching. And so there's a really great video of the Bobo doll experiments. And so please click on that on eCampus and watch a short video about these Bobo doll experiments. And when you're done, return to this clip, this learning number 6 video. Okay, so as that video showed, these children learned how to treat the Bobo doll based on their observations of the adult in the room. So this kind of work is really important for thinking about how children learn about violence or other kinds of things. And so some people think that media, like violence being shown in the media, can contribute to aggressive behavior. And so if you think that like when children learn things by viewing it, we view a lot of violence on TV and through the media. And so that could be one mechanism through which children learn how to act violently. Also, if they view violence in their own life, if they live in a violent family, or if they just, their siblings or their parents act aggressively. And so through this observation, children learn how to treat other people and how to act. Another interesting thing that these experiments showed was that the strongest effect of imitation occurred when the children was watching the person in person, like live in the room next, like right with them. So with the live model, this effect is really strong. But when the children were watching the model on TV, the effect still happened, but it was a little bit weaker. And the effect was even weaker still if the model was like a cartoon figure and animated. And so the more realistic the model is, the stronger this effect of observational learning will be. And so I hope that you can find examples of observational learning in your everyday life. I'm sure if you start to look around, you'll see instances of this in school and in life. I also want to note that, operant conditioning and observational learning can work together. And so this social learning also works through reinforcement. And so if a child sees someone acting in a certain way and sees them being rewarded for it, they're also more likely to copy that behavior. And if they see a person getting punished for a behavior, they're less likely to copy it. And so observational learning also works hand in hand with operant conditioning and principles of reinforcement and punishment. Okay, so another type of learning is insight learning, which is where you experience kind of an epiphany, where you learn just by using your own mind. You don't see something, somebody doesn't tell you how to do it, you don't associate two events together, it's just in your own mind. And there's a really great example of this with Sultan the chimpanzee. And so I'm going to upload a link to this, and please click on the link to see an example of insight learning with Sultan the chimpanzee. And then when you're done, please return back to this same video. Okay, so in that video with Sultan the chimpanzee, it showed an example of this monkey, this chimpanzee, learning how to get the banana just with its own thoughts. So this German psychologist Wolfgang Kohler observed chimpanzees and noticed that sometimes chimpanzees problem solved simply by thinking without rewards. Most notably, his chimpanzee named Sultan was in a room and he hung a banana from the ceiling. Sultan stared at the banana, got underneath it, and waved his arms. Then he stared at it, and Kohler said something just seemed to snap. So Sultan stacked some crates underneath the banana and then climbed up for his reward. So Sultan had never done this before, but he basically problem solved with the reward. So it's kind of interesting. Something just snapped. He just realized what he needed to do. He didn't see anybody else stack the crates, but he just made a connection. He just knew that if he stacked the crates, he could get the banana. And so this is an example of insight learning. Another example is how with Singer and the sewing machine. So the way that the sewing machine was invented. So a man named Singer, who invented the sewing machine, said that how he created the machine came to him in a dream. So he realized in his dream that the thread had to be threaded not at the back of the needle, as is the case with hand sewing needles, but at the front of the needle. And this insight just came to him. It wasn't through other types of learning like associative learning or observation. He just had this insight. And so insight is another type of learning that's distinct from the others that we've talked about today. Cognitive learning is another type of learning, and this is probably what you're most familiar with if you think about like studying for an exam or remembering things, just using your cognitive processes. And so there are a few principles in cognitive psychology that enhance learning, and I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but I just want you to make you aware of them, and you should learn more about these when we cover memory. But so there's this principle of the depth of processing during encoding. So when you are encoding or learning information, you can process something really shallowly, so you could just read it and kind of process it on the surface level, or you can go really deep and think about the underlying meanings, and you can really go deeply into processing. And the more deeply you process something, the better you remember it. There's also a principle of studying spaced out versus mass studying. And so research shows that if you study in a more spaced out way, for example, studying 1 hour every day for 5 days, that will be better for learning than if you study in a massed session, like studying for 5 hours for 1 day. And so you could apply this to your class here. If you watch like a couple of the lecture videos every day over the course of the week, you will probably retain this information and learn it better than if you just sit down and watch all of the videos in one sitting. And I know it might be tempting to do it that way, but just know that research shows that learning and memory are better when a person spaces out the learning over time. It's also beneficial to interleave multiple skills together. So, for example, switching back and forth between studying psychology and then history and then math and then psych. And so kind of switching back and forth rather than just studying psychology for like a whole week and then studying another thing. This is probably interesting as you're taking a summer class. And so right now it's like we're cramming all of psychology into one quick session. And so this is not as beneficial to learning as it would be in like the fall semester where you take psychology along with other classes and they're kind of interleaved together. And one of the points about these is that all of these these processes they make it studying and learning more difficult. So processing something more deeply or spacing it out or interleaving it with multiple subjects, this makes the learning process more difficult because you kind of have to like jump back and forth between topics or recall something or just learn in a more effortful way. And so this kind of a difficult or effortful learning, Bjork, a researcher, coined this as desirable difficulties. And so basically the kind of take home is that learning that requires a considerable but desirable amount of effort improves long-term performance or learning. So when you're studying for a test, for example, if you like reread your notes, that is maybe not super effortful because you're just like rereading something. But if you quiz yourself with flashcards, that's typically much more effortful because you have to like recall the information from scratch. And so the more effortful study strategies are shown to be more effective in learning. So remember that. Think about desirable difficulties when you're studying. And if your study strategy feels really easy, it might not be as effective as you think it is. And if your study strategy seems really effortful, like quizzing yourself or rewriting your notes from your own memory, those kinds of strategies tend to be more effective for learning. You could also try interleaving studying with different content. One thing to keep in mind is that these difficult study strategies might slow down learning initially. And so, it might take longer and it might be harder to kind of remember things, but the long-term benefits are far greater than with easy tasks. Also, I'll just say with the easy tasks, they may give the strategy or they may give the illusion of learning because they're really easy. So if you're just like rereading your notes and highlighting things, it might appear as if you really know the material because it feels pretty seamless and easy, but that might be an illusion. And so just try to remember to keep it effortful and try to use these desirable difficulties when studying, and that will enhance your cognitive learning.